Welcome to the Biohacking Superhuman Performance Podcast. My name is Natalie Nidham. I'm a nutritionist, a human potential and epigenetic coach, and I created this podcast to bring you the latest ways to take control of your health and longevity. We cover it all, from new technology to ancestral health practices, personalized interventions, and a very special interest of mine, peptides. Enjoy the show. In this episode of the Biohacking Superhuman Performance Podcast, I get to interview Caleb Greer, a nurse practitioner in Austin, Texas. I'd say Caleb is not just a nurse practitioner. This guy is the real deal. He's got a full-on integrative approach to helping people to heal, helping people to optimize. You know, that word optimize, I kind of love it and hate it. What the heck does that mean? And really, I'll tell you what I think optimize means is when we take people who are in, you know, kind of not feeling their greatest, right? If we have a baseline of where we want to be, we are below that baseline. And what we seek to do, what I seek to do in my practice and what Caleb goes to do as well, is we work towards getting people back to that baseline where they're okay. And then we work towards moving them into that optimized place, that place where you don't just feel okay, you feel great. You don't just move well, you move beautifully or really well. You move without pain. You move through life with ease. You become anti-fragile, or as I like to refer to it, you become resilient. So more able to withstand the stresses and strains of daily life. Anyway, what this is really about is Caleb, and Caleb and I actually now work together and we collaborate on patients, or in my case, clients, in his case, patients, because he is a nurse practitioner. But we collaborate on working on cases together where we help people to do exactly that. We bring them from that state of imbalance into a state of balance. And then from that state of balance, we move them towards the line to get to their own personal superhuman state. Caleb is based in Austin, Texas. He actually works out of a practice there, but he also practices telehealth with me in certain markets in the US. Where he's able to prescribe medication, and Caleb also works with peptides. What a surprise. I hope that you enjoy this episode. This will be the first of several. We're going to be doing Q&As. We're going to be talking about different topics together, kind of jamming out on different situations that we come across in people that we work with together. For today, this is really an intro. It's an intro to Caleb's philosophy, his approach, his background. I hope that you enjoy it. I think it was really interesting to me. I learned a bunch of stuff in here. So remember, as you listen to this podcast, if you enjoy it, make sure to leave us a 5-star review on iTunes so that the podcast continues climb up the ranks. We are already, after just maybe a month and a half, we're already in the top 100 in both Canada and the US. And that's all thanks to you guys. So thank you so much for tuning in, and make sure to leave us your comments and that 5-star review. Enjoy the episode. Okay, welcome to another episode of Biohacking Superhuman Performance. I'm Natalie Nidham, and I am here today with Caleb Greer. Caleb is, Caleb's a guy. He's this guy that I met in Austin. At a course that I took that helped me to become certified in epigenetics with a Puron. But Caleb is a functional nurse practitioner practicing in Austin. Welcome to the show, Caleb.
Thanks for having me, Nat.
So Caleb and I don't know, I think I'm the one that you reached out to me because you wanted that thing that you ended up sending back, that heart monitor. What was it? It was what was it? Oh, cardio. QARDIO. Or
EKG, heart rate variability monitor. Turned out to be too cumbersome to wear all the time.
Yeah, so that's interesting. So we could talk about that a little bit. But Caleb, why don't you tell us about you? How did you get into what you do? Why do you do what you do? And fill us in.
I mean, when it comes down to it, I like solving problems. And so back in college, I knew I wanted to do something sciencey. It started with genetics, and I really liked genetics, but I didn't want to be stuck in a lab. So my stepmom's a chiropractor, and after talking with her a whole bunch, being interested in human physiology and manual medicine, I thought that sounded like a pretty decent way to go. So I enrolled in chiropractic school after my junior year of undergrad. And let's see, that was really enjoyable for me. I mean, it was really hands-on. I got to learn a lot of awesome techniques and really master anatomy and physiology in a way that I didn't really have an appreciation for. We had a gross anatomy lab, so we got to dissect cadavers and get an appreciation for the gross anatomy, really.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I've dissected cadavers. It's when you get past the smell, it's actually quite fascinating.
Yeah, that's part of the fun.
What the
during chiropractic school is when I really got involved with this functional neurology, and it was really interesting because I'd always been into neuroscience and behavioral kind of neuropsychiatry, and understanding the brain from a functional aspect, not just a psychological aspect, and getting to know what the parts of the brain did and how to basically manipulate them to improve outcomes in people with various neurological and psychological disorders. It was really cool. And so I got this internship with a place called, at the time, Carrick Brain Centers in Dallas. And so that's kind of where a lot of my hands-on applicability got started with a couple of mentors there. And after getting immersed in that clinical neuroscience side, the capacity for metabolic function had to come into play, because in neuron theory, there's basically this, you need stimulation, you need fuel, and the fuel part is what was kind of missing in that model, right? And so the integration of functional medicine and integrative medicine to look at metabolic disturbances and kind of view from the level of the mitochondria kind of upward and try to help the neurons function at an optimal perspective. That was where that piece kind of got added. So the combination of clinical neuroscience and the functional medicine kind of led to this, broad understanding of how people work. And I left chiropractic school and started the nurse practitioner track, and graduated with a nursing degree, and then finally the master's, and all the while kind of working in different places and picking up tools of the trade along the way.
So are you also a chiropractor?
No, I didn't finish.
Oh, you didn't finish that. You left that to become a nurse practitioner.
Yeah.
I see. But you still got a few years under your belt. So it's all sharing of information, really.
Definitely. And I wouldn't trade that education for anything. I mean, it's played a huge role in how I've, adopted kind of the interventional spine and peripheral, joint rehabilitative injections and things like that too. So it's definitely still handy. I still use osteopathic manipulations in practice, and it's still a great tool to have in the toolbox.
Amazing. And so you mentioned that you did a master's as well. What was your master's in?
That is the family nurse practitioner.
Oh, that is the master's degree. I see.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Well, I didn't even know about the chiropractic thing. So that adds a whole other layer. That explains a lot, actually. So Caleb you work in a clinic in Austin, Texas, and then also Caleb and I have had the pleasure over the last little while of collaborating on a couple of clients that we've been working on optimizing together. So, but in the clinic, why don't you tell us a little bit about the kind of work that you do in the clinic? Because you do some interesting stuff. Like you run the gamut, really, from doing probably traditional manipulations, as you talk about, but you're doing injections in joints. You touch on peptides a bit. Like, why don't you tell us a little bit about that kind of side of what you're doing as well? Yeah.
So the practice I work in, it started as a classical pain management interventional spine center, and has developed over the years into more of a regeneratively focused practice with, we have all of our own, we have our own lab and flow cytometry for stem cells that we aspirate from bone marrow and from adipose tissue, and get a good quality control on exactly what's the live cell count that we're injecting into somebody's spine or whatever. But yeah, so we see people with a variety of different conditions in their spine and peripheral joints, and we do conventional workups to really nail down a diagnosis of where their pain generators are.
Yeah.
And after we know that, with a different course of, anesthetic injections, with or without steroids or whatever, we can then kind of make a regenerative plan that includes prolotherapy and PRP and stem cells if needed, or exosomes, with or without peptides to help facilitate their healing process. But yeah, covers the whole gamut.
Amazing. So with the peptides, with or without peptides, you clearly find that sometimes they're helpful and then other times they're not. So,
and this is kind of where the rubber meets the road with those guys. It's perceived that they have a benefit. Mm-hmm. Definitely, sometimes we'll have people start the peptides before the regenerative, treatment starts, and they'll already kind of have improvements beforehand.
Okay.
So there's definitely an objective improvement prior to the regenerative plan, but now we kind of start it in the middle of their. So generally speaking, the workup goes, prolotherapy every 2 weeks for 3 injections, then we move on to PRP. And at that biological entrance point, because the prolotherapy is just sugar water and some anesthetic agent. But whenever we start using autologous healing products like the PRP or the bone marrow, we want to make sure that, they have the best chance of actually stimulating collagen synthesis and migrating the pericytes from the reservoirs and initiating the healing process. So if you do, things like BPC and CJC with ipamorelin, there's a better chance that stuff is going to have the proliferative impact that we're looking for.
Interesting. So when you used to use I guess the answer is probably no, because you don't do it anymore. But when you used to use the peptides ahead of time and people would improve, was your sense that it was more of an improvement in terms of symptoms rather than function and regenerative healing kind of thing?
I can't say. Number one, we didn't have a pre-post MRI or anything like that. But from a functional perspective, that's what they look for the most. Because if the pain isn't inhibiting their movement, or whatever, a golf or being able to do a hang clean, then by all intents and purposes, we would have to say that tissue regenerated to some degree.
Right.
Because,
right. Because it's not exactly just shutting off a pain signal. It's affecting something that's not.
Right. It's not hydrocodone. It's not just decreasing your sensitivity to the pain.
Yeah, thereby allowing you to destroy the joint completely and fully.
Right, yeah. I feel good. I can go do what I was doing before.
Oh, that's awesome. Yay. Until it explodes. Like my brother. Anyway, we won't talk about him right now. He'll shoot me. Okay, so so you do all this work in the regenerative side and the pain management side, but you've got another superpower, which is where you and I have intersected a little bit more in terms of the people that we've worked on together. And I think what's fascinating about it is that, and what I'm talking about is hormone optimization and replacement for men and for women. But what I think what really interested me in working with you, and I think will be most interesting to the people listening to this, is that one of the ways that you view hormone optimization, it's not just for the sake of hormones. It's even when you've got some kind of a musculoskeletal injury or anything else going on, it's kind of reiterating that point that you almost can't get optimal results unless your hormones are optimized.
Yeah. So that's kind of how this other part of the practice kind of blew up, so to speak. So I run kind of the integrative side of the practice with IV therapy and hormone replacement, all that kind of stuff. So whenever the physician that I work with has a patient that is consider undergoing a regenerative treatment plan, he refers them over to my part of the world and says, go get your blood work done, have a meeting with Caleb, and kind of figure out if there's anything physiologically speaking that's inhibiting your healing process, whether that's losing weight or getting hormones on board, or reducing inflammatory markers or cardiovascular stress. And so that's kind of the role that I take in their healing process in the beginning stages.
So really what you're doing is you're optimizing them, not just from a hormone perspective, but every other. It's that, which makes all the sense in the world, right? You've got someone with a crazy amount of inflammation in their body. You can you can operate and do whatever the heck you want. Nothing's going to take unless you've addressed that inflammation first. So
yeah, exactly. And if you've got someone that's overweight and has osteoarthritis in their knees, like what the hell are you doing injecting their knees if they still have the gravity of their weight putting more stress on the knee joint? So even if you put, stem cells in the knees, like they're not going to regenerate that great because you still have the problem of being obese. So, part of the conversation is, look, let's kind of wrap this in a package and say, look, we have to be down to a certain weight so that we know that you're willing to kind of do the back end work and actually do what it's going to take to heal rather than just, throw some money at this problem and think you're going to be better.
Yeah, that's cool. So that's like care with conditions.
Yeah. No, I mean, and some people are a little bit peeved with it because they're like, oh, I thought it was just going to be stem cells are all this in a bag of chips. And, it's like the more money you spend on something, the better outcomes you get. That's not the case.
No. That's awesome. Well, I mean, I'm learning lots about what you do still myself. So that's actually really interesting. So one of the things, we will probably do a few more of these interviews in the future because there's so many different areas that you touch. But I think what we decided today is we were really going to focus on the hormone optimization side of things. And so basically, I think one of the areas we were going to explore is getting that this whole nuance between getting people to a functional level of hormone balance. And then from there, what does it mean to get them optimized? And maybe what we can do is we can split the conversation between men and women because we were talking ahead of time and talking about how, men and women are both simple and complicated for very different reasons. Mm-hmm. And I feel like in a lot of the online forums and the Facebook groups, sometimes you get, I don't know if it's simplified, but kind of a very heavy-handed approach on hormones where really it needs to be very nuanced and fine-tuned from what I gather. So should we start with the boys or do we want to start with
Sure. Yeah, the boys are a little bit easier.
Well, they are, you guys are a little simpler than us girls, right? We like to keep you on your toes.
Yeah. Yeah. So do you have a particular question you want to kind of start out with or?
Well, I think one of the things that, so there's a couple of things. So number one, maybe why don't we start with before the hormone replacement? Why don't we start with, you get two kinds of people in the world. The people that are like, just hit me, I want to be better. And people that are like, hormones, man, I think that's really dangerous. What is it that people really need to worry about? Because my understanding with male TRT in particular, once you start, this is a train you never get off of kind of thing. Yeah. And this could be coming from, I run a big Facebook group and I try not to let too many of the big dudes in, but at the end of the day, they always find their way in. And actually, to be fair, I've got a couple of really balanced, great guys in there. But why don't we talk about that a little bit? Because my impression is, you do one testosterone shot when you're 32 and that's it. You're on for life. So
yeah. Well, I mean, let's appreciate the bodybuilding world and the meathead industry because without them we would be very, very, very far behind where we are now in our understanding of how these things work. So
yeah, these guys are totally on the bandwagon. Yeah, even peptides, like they were the first to the party, I think, with peptides, right? I mean,
probably. Well, no. So if you start testosterone, there's definitely post-cycle therapy that you can get off. Now, the problem you run into is, do you want to be back at where you were before you started? And that's the conversation I have with people, because if people come in symptomatic, then obviously they don't want to be symptomatic anymore. If someone's coming in from a performance perspective and they just want to, be a boss, then we have that conversation that, look, you're going to get super physiologic. Okay. And that's okay. How long do you want to do it? 4, 8, 12 weeks. All right, let's make a plan. Getting off of that cycle, right? You're going to do a number of different interventions that are going to keep you from feeling like dog shit and, get you back to baseline. You might fluctuate a little bit under baseline, but your testicles are going to take over again, right? If they weren't bad to begin with, they're not going to just magically, lose their functional ability after taking testosterone.
Right. And so when you say super physiologic, so for that 8 to 12 weeks, they're going to go into what we would call an anabolic phase, right? So presumably they're just going to build mass over that 8 to 12 weeks. Are they able to maintain it after?
So depends on how much they build, right? And so if you're putting someone on, bigger doses, it's going to be a lot harder to maintain the mass.
Right.
Now, there are different ways that you can, trick yourself into maintaining it, but afterwards you're going to have to work a heck of a lot harder to maintain that, right? Because, the strength that you lose from, the protein turnover and anabolism from the testosterone is going to be tangible.
Right.
The other problem you really run into is when you gain mass that fast, the strength and the tensile integrity of the muscle far outweighs the strength and integrity of the tendons. And that's where, the muscle injuries at that myotendinous junction seem to, increase.
Okay. All right. So let's not talk about bodybuilding so much. Let's talk more about, we're talking about functionality here. We're talking about, and why don't we talk a little bit about what are the signs and symptoms that guys experience because what I'm seeing also in these groups is people often don't attribute the symptoms that they're experiencing to hormones that are not optimized. Mm-hmm. And why don't we talk a little bit about that? It's like we're talking about guys right now, but why don't we talk about that a little bit? Because I think there's a couple of them that people don't think of necessarily.
Yeah, I would say the biggest ones are probably sleep, and not waking up rested and having poor recovery. People typically think of like libido and, more of the sexual kind of side effects as being, low testosterone. But, push comes to shove, that's a lot more psychosocial with a lot of the people that I see. Their stress is high, especially with coronavirus and all this other stuff. And that doesn't mean their testosterone is not low. But, if all of a sudden someone gets divorced and they can't get it up for their new girlfriend, like that's not a problem with testosterone.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a lot to consider when you're looking at the symptoms of low T classically, and make sure you have that conversation, because it's like, if I replace your testosterone, you might feel great, but it's not the fix. So I would say classically, the real low T is going to be cardiometabolically getting ill, right? So more fat mass around the midline, eating the same but gaining weight, a decrease in metabolic function, and then again really doing the same kinds of exercises and not recovering well at all. Okay.
And what about mood? Like, can depression and anxiety be linked to low testosterone?
Yeah, but it's not as acute. Like that's kind of something that develops more early, and then eventually you'll find someone to talk about and say, okay, well, let's do your blood work and find out they have low T, and they could have been, low for the last 10 years. And that's something that you do a test trial and say, okay, let's try testosterone and see what your mood does. But, generally speaking, people don't come in and say, yeah, I've just been, I don't know why, but I've never been depressed, but now I'm just depressed.
But when they start testosterone, is it possible that they come in and go, wow, I feel amazing. Like, I didn't realize how crappy I was feeling.
Absolutely.
Yeah, because it's probably a very slow decline, right? That you can't attribute to anything.
It's a frog in boiling water situation for sure.
Yeah. Okay. So that's our boys. Now for women, and so, actually there was one other question. So what is the age that you're seeing men, like general? Everybody's different, right? We talked about, you said something really early before we started recording in terms of testosterone levels in men now of different generations, because we're at a very interesting time in humanity where it seems that earlier generations somehow you hear a lot about fertility clinics having to lower the bar on what they consider to be appropriate sperm counts just because younger men are producing lower sperm than their fathers or grandfathers did, for example. So what do you have to say? I don't know which of those questions you want to have to talk about all of them. But
let's start with the generational differences. I'm seeing even as low as like 22, right? People coming in with increased injuries. And again, they kind of get discovered after they come and have their workup with me as a part of their problem with their musculoskeletal integrity is having, low testosterone.
Really? In their 20s?
Yeah, in their 20s.
Wow.
Now, I would say on average, probably late 30s, early 40s.
Is when they're...
I think that's probably the majority of people kind of coming in and figuring out something is wrong. And again, it's not sexual, right? They're still... Their erectile function is fine. There are no problems in the bedroom. It's sleep. It's lack of quality exercise. Like they're just not recovering as well. They can't go as hard without, being out of commission for a day or two. And that concerns a lot of people, especially, over the past few months when people are just by themselves and trying to get workouts in and not be, get their COVID-15.
Yeah.
Or COVID-19.
So whatever number it is.
Yeah, the weight gain, the freshman 15, COVID-19.
Fill in the gap. Yeah.
Yeah. And then on the same token, right, I have people in their 70s and 80s that are like, yeah, I'm coming in. I feel pretty good, but I feel like it's not as good as it once was. And their testosterone levels will be, what the goal is for replacement, getting 800 or 1200 in their total. And, their free is 9 or 10, nanograms per deciliter. And to those people, you got to go back and look at some other markers to see, is it androgen resistance, more on the senescent cell side of aging, where their testosterone is fine, but it's just not hitting receptor targets. And it's not transducing the same kind of, signal to potentiate the downstream effects. So for them, you kind of say, well, look, your testosterone levels are fine, but the signal to transduction ratio is not appropriate. So these people will also have high gonadotropins, right? High LH and FSH, because they're getting feedback in the brain that says, I actually don't have enough.
Right. So what do you do for those guys? You're clearly just giving them more testosterone is not going to do the trick, is it?
Yeah. Well, so for them, you do some of the more kind of specific designer steroids that aren't really geared towards improving testosterone, but, geared towards improving muscle mass and staving off sarcopenia and osteopenia.
Interesting. Huh. That's really cool. Okay. I didn't know that. So then, but then in these younger guys in their late 30s, early 40s, you are seeing probably an increased need of doing this kind of testosterone optimization, as it were. Yeah,
the actual testosterone itself. And then depending on if they want to still have kids or not, then you trickle in some fertility stuff in there too to keep their sperm counts up. Because after about 3 or 4 weeks on testosterone, and actually it's kind of a misconception, but if you're low on testosterone and you start testosterone, you're actually more fertile in that first little phase. Whereas, it's only after 3 or 4 weeks that you start to lose that intratesticular testosterone level and volume. Even for people that are getting on it that want to maintain their fertility, that first few weeks might be like a real good shot to have a kid.
Okay. It's probably a good thing to know, just in case.
It is. That's how both of my kids were born, by the way.
You're kidding. And was that intentional? Or, I would think you would have learned from the first one. No, you didn't learn from the first one.
No. Nope.
Well, they're awfully cute.
Thanks.
You got cute little kids out of the deal.
They were worth it, I guess.
What's that?
I said they were worth it, I guess.
There you go. They were worth it. And at least you were with someone you wanted to be with.
Yeah, no, that's true.
Anyway, that's good information, I'm sure, for people who may not be in a steady relationship or in that place.
Yeah, no, definitely is for sure. Because you get this kind of, again, false premise that you're basically on male birth control and not for a little bit. Okay,
good to know. All right, so for women now, in terms of hormone replacement on the women's side, let's talk a little bit about where, again, like a lot of, so first of all, there's the fear of hormones from a lot of women in terms of putting them at a greater risk of breast cancer and other types of cancers. So maybe we could talk about that a little bit and how those risks get managed and mitigated, if it will, as it were. And maybe there's some people that really shouldn't be using hormone therapy, but do you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So, I always have a very in-depth conversation with women when it comes to hormone replacement, because there is this inherent fear of getting breast cancer. And it kind of all stems from this women's health initiative that was a big, gigantic study back in the early 2000s. And, their use of the combination of both synthetic, Premarin, pregnant horse urine, which has a bunch of different estrogens, right? It's not just estradiol.
Yeah.
With the combination of progesterone or progestin, not bioidentical progesterone, showed this relative, I think it was 26% increase in breast cancer. But, if you go back and look at the absolute difference, it was 1%. And so just kind of clarifying that, this study was there was just a lot of intrinsic bias in the study. And I contrast with the point of the reduced cardiovascular risk that occurs with taking hormones after menopause. And since that's the number one killer of, women over the age of 60, then it's a little bit more important to actually take that seriously. So, I print them out this write-up that I wrote that has kind of all those data points in it so they can be educated themselves. I don't feel like I'm pushing them towards it. But generally speaking, that's kind of the spiel that I give them. And there's a little bit, there's some data to suggest that starting women on hormones after 10 years post-menopause is, not a great idea, but I just haven't found that to be clinically correct in practice, And, of course, these are people that give consent and have rigorous follow-up at multiple points. And we do their typical, breast ultrasounds and uterine transvaginal ultrasounds just to make sure that we're doing everything correctly as far as monitoring goes.
Yeah. Well, that's an interesting point because I was reading a book recently written by a doctor, and he talked about seeing a patient, and I want to say she was in her 70s at least, maybe even her 80s, and she was having some real cognitive issues. And one of the first things he did was hormone replacement for her, which kind of left me scratching my head going, really? Like you would do hormone replacement on a woman who's never done it before, who's in her 70s or her 80s. And along with everything else that he did for her, it was transformative. Like it really, not that it solved all her problems, but it raised the bar on her function in a big way, which I was surprised about. I forgot to ask you about that, but you answered it already. You brought it up.
Yeah. So, estrogen and progesterone and testosterone are all very important when it comes to mitochondrial function. They're all nuclear receptor upregulators, and they all increase, through PGC alpha, the upregulation of mitochondrial synthesis, especially in neurons that get senescent and start losing their function. It's super important, at least from a mechanistic perspective. I don't think it's been proven that HRT reduces any kind of cognitive decline, but from a hypothetical and clinical perspective, it's important to at least know that through that mechanism, there's a good chance that starting early could stave that off.
Well, and we talk about menopause brain, right? So women going through menopause all of a sudden become super forgetful, and they think they're going crazy when, as you lose that estrogen and you need estrogen in your brain to function properly, like it's a thing. It's a real thing. So, is it going to prevent cognitive, neurodegenerative disease down the road? As you say, there's no conclusive, or I don't even know if anybody's really looked at it yet, but it's not.
I think they've retrospectively looked at some of the data with the different trials and seen if there was any, outcome difference in how many people got dementia versus didn't in the study groups. But again, that goes back to what kind of people were included in the study to begin with.
Yeah, no, there's biases and all that stuff. So definitely, so for a woman to be using hormone replacement, it can almost be depending on which hormones. You could be doing this before menopause, right? Because a progesterone for sleep apparently is magical in certain women who need it.
Yeah, for sure. And not just, so the perimenopausal transition is a huge time for women to kind of figure out when they need something, because that's the worst time if they're going to have one, right? That's when the hot flashes start, in that interim between having your, in the year of not having a period, basically, all these things kind of pop up. It can persist for, many years before actually, leveling out and having your uterus and ovaries kind of shut down.
Yeah.
But yeah, the perimenopausal transition is a huge place where we typically replace a good deal of their hormones.
And so is it a good idea for women to get a workup before they go into that so that you have a better baseline? Because isn't there great variability in where people feel good? So if you had a baseline before, their whole world kind of blows up kind of thing, would it make it easier then to manage them through? I've always believed if your hormones are better balanced moving into menopause, you're going to have a much easier time. And one of the tragedies in life, I think for women, is that we're taught that, PMS, you're going to feel like crap for a week, whatever month, deal with it, where really it's a sign of imbalanced hormones, where if we helped women to balance their hormones through their reproductive years, they would have a much easier time moving through their transitions later on.
Yeah, 100%. This is kind of where, when you have a woman earlier, especially when we see them here for various different reasons, you bring up the question and say exactly that, right? If you know what your hormones are doing now when you're healthy, or, if they have migraines and things, that's a lot of the times, they'll come in and we'll talk about their cervical issues, and migraines will be one of their problems, or headaches, or consistent things like that. And they'll have a very, catamenial pattern to it. And that's an indication for hormone replacement in itself too, which is one of the strangest places that there's such taboo against, right? And starting women on estrogen that have migraine with aura. It's literally the problem. When you have...
But we're putting 14-year-olds on birth control so they don't get pimples. But we don't want to give women estrogen for their crippling migraines as adults.
You don't want to give them synthetic, You don't want to give them synthetic estrogen, right? So it's been super transformative for the people that have had these terrible migraines with auras for years, and they haven't had any successful treatments, and they come and be like, oh, wait, we can do that? It's like, yeah, as long as you know that it's not standard of care and that X, Y, and Z can happen, but let's monitor and see if it works. And if we diagnose it appropriately, it always works.
Yeah. Interesting.
So that's a place. And then obviously, so going back to your original question, is it helpful to get someone's levels monitored throughout their, adult life when they're still having normal cycles? If they have normal cycles, how many people have normal cycles? And getting their point right at their, what's their lowest level of estrogen from day 1 to 5 in their cycle? What's their highest level of estrogen from, day 12 to 16? And what's the progesterone at that point? How is their ovulation cycle? And then what's their estrogen on the end of their cycle, right? How hard is that delta from their highest point to their lowest point? And that will give you the cue, because, when I think about hormone replacement for women, the theory that I'm going off of is that to make them feel the best, you want the point at highest genetic translation of youth and vitality, which is at ovulation or just shortly thereafter. And so at that point, that's where you want their hormones to be.
Cool.
So that's what you go for.
So that's what you aim for when you're doing the replacement down the road. And for all the reasons that we know. So let's talk a little bit about the reasons why now we want to optimize hormones for men and for women. And it's what, it's funny. I don't know. I mean, I think that as the human condition has always been one that doesn't want to age, doesn't want to get sick. I mean, obviously, nobody wants to get sick. Nobody wants to die. But I think that generationally, across all the generations at this particular juncture in time, we are virtually obsessed with stopping the clock or turning it back or mitigating the effects of aging. So there's a certain reality to the passage of time that we're never going to change. But what is it that we can hope to achieve by optimizing these hormones? And that is, I think there's a piece of aesthetics to it, maybe, because, your skin won't suffer as badly. But from a functional perspective, in terms of bone density, lean muscle mass, quality of life, cognitive health, it's now pretty much irrefutable that if you're open to having your hormones optimized, you're going to be able to live your life very differently in your 50s, 60s, and 70s than maybe even your parents did. And maybe they didn't need it as badly, to your point, because their hormones are sticking differently, but... Well,
all the women do.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's another thing I tell people.
And we get dropped off a cliff, man. It is so not fair.
Yeah, and you guys have been told just to kind of suck it up and bear it as a woman to go through menopause, and it's just kind of sad. But people come in and they're like, it's not natural to do hormone replacement therapy, and I tell them at the inverse, like, it's not natural to live to your age.
Yeah.
Right. And so with increased
lifespan.
Yeah, exactly. With increased lifespan comes the need for increased health span at the same time, and there's going to be a lot of things that are not going to be quote unquote natural that you're going to be wanting to do to maintain your quality of life. Yeah,
that's a really good line, Caleb. I think that's going to be a post.
Yeah.
That's a good. That could be a tagline. With increased lifespan comes the need for increased health span. I think that's such a good point, and that's it's what we're all aiming for. Right. So I think part of what drove me to seek you out and to talk to you about working with clients is this in the work that I do with people, which is helping them to personalize their nutrition and lifestyle and all the biohacking tools that we have access to, even the peptides we have access to. There's fundamental reality that if we haven't gotten our house in order in a very fundamental way in the first place, you're just not going to get the results, and you're not going to be able to achieve a quarter of what you could than if you did.
Yeah, I mean, it's just so easy. Again, it's simple, but it's not easy, right? And so the impetus to really get your hormones in balance as a main system in your body that is not functioning appropriately, that kind of runs a large degree of your genetic programming and how you age. It's just asinine to try and use things that have less data and less potency to do the same thing when you can do that first, feel a world of difference, and then use these different, small molecules to potentiate and take it even a little bit further.
Yeah. Interesting. Right. That's a really good point. So how much time do we have left? Because I know you have a hard stop coming up.
5 minutes.
Okay. So here's what we're going to do. The first thing I'm going to say is I'm going to remind people that none of the information in this podcast is to be taken as medical advice. If you want to have your hormones looked at or any of that other stuff, you need to talk to your medical professional. If you want to talk to us, I'm going to tell you how to reach us, because we do this kind of work together with Caleb really shouldering the biggest load of the medical piece of the work that we do. But what I will say is we'll do another episode down the road, and we're going to talk about the difference between blood labs, things like the Dutch, using genomics to influence or inform some of the information that you might be looking for when you're optimizing your hormones. Does that sound fair? Because we were going to talk about that today, but I think we've used up our time. So,
absolutely.
Okay. So Caleb, where can people find you if they're looking to get in touch with you? And you practice telemedicine too, right? So you have two practices really. So you've got your in-person practice, which is your Monday to Friday gig. And so if people happen to be in Austin, they can find you there.
Yeah. So Caleb at Dasein Health, that's DASEIN health.org. That's kind of my work email.
Okay.
And so if I get, a connection through that and it's someone local, then I'll kind of refer them to my office manager that, they can get set up with an appointment here. If it's kind of, from a distance, there's some insurance that we can take from out of state that we can kind of, see if that's going to be a possibility or not. And then, the last kind of demographic is kind of the people that we work on together, which, they're just kind of wanting optimization piece, and they want that kind of medical management that I can provide, and then you just kind of take over from a coaching perspective and guide the process there. So yeah, I'm not really a social media guy, especially in light of everything that's happening right now. So
it's all good. I am. I'll be our social media piece. So Caleb, so you can find Caleb through that email, or you can reach out to me. And like we said, we're definitely taking clients together these days for people who are looking to optimize that way. But Caleb, I just wanted to say, so to find me, actually, I'll just say this. You can find me on the evil Facebook still at the group Biohacking Superhuman Performance. You can find me on Instagram under my name, Natalie Nidham. And my website is natalienidham.com. So that's how to find me. That's how to find Caleb. And I think we're done. Thank you so much today.
Yeah. Thanks, Nat.
This was fun. Thank you.
Have a happy weekend.
And you. Thank you so much for listening to this episode of the Biohacking Superhuman Performance Podcast. If you enjoyed it, make sure to leave us a 5-star review on iTunes so that we can continue our climb up the ranks into hopefully maybe the top 50. Who knows? Dream big, right? In the meantime, if you're looking to get in touch with me, you can find me on Facebook in the Biohacking Superhuman Performance group, or you can find me online on my website. You can reach out to me through my website. My website is natniddam, natniddam.com. You can learn a little bit more about me, and you can reach out to me. And if you're interested in working with Caleb and me, or learning more about what's involved in doing that, then by all means, reach out to me through my website, and we can arrange a 3-way call so that you can get to know both of us. So thanks again for being here, and we'll see you next time.